All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited that you are joining us for the Power of webinar series. Plexus is your LGBT and allied Chamber of Commerce. I'm Amanda Cole. My pronouns are she, her, and I have the honor of being the executive director. Our Power of series really focuses in on ways to support nonprofits and small business owners and entrepreneurs with things like marketing, outreach and communication, grant writing, business development, things of that nature. At the end of today's webinar, I'll send a poll up so you can tell us a little bit about what you might be interested in learning today. Some housekeeping, we are recording right now. And so if your video is on, you might show up at the top of the recording. I can never remember how that goes, but I love it. We want you to be using the chat to share your contact information with one another if you're interested in staying connected after this program. Of course, to ask your questions or give feedback to our presenter as they go through their slides and share their information today. One thing you might notice is some of us have our pronouns in our Zoom display. This is a really great way to help improve communication because then we're not having to do a guessing game over screens. So I'm just going to walk you through how to do that. If you click on your name in the participant list, you click on more, you can hit rename and you can add your name and pronouns there. You can also hover over your video if it's on and hit those three buttons. But this is just one of those ways that we can improve communication and have a more inclusive environment. So before I hand it over, I'm going to tell us a little bit about Natalie Gemiola. Their pronouns are she, they, and they are an adult services associate at Westlake Porter Public Library. She has worked in libraries for over a decade with a focus on community outreach and program development and has presented at numerous conferences. So we're really fortunate that we have her with us today on our Power of webinar series. A former AmeriCorps service volunteer, woo woo AmeriCorps, passionate about racial and queer justice issues. Natalie is a founder and co-chair of WPPL's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, their DEI team, and a member of the Ohio Library Council's DEI committee. So we are in great hands here. And Natalie, I'm going to hand it on over to you. Thank you so very much for doing this with us today. We're excited.
Hi, Amanda, and thank you for inviting me. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on this winter afternoon. I appreciate it. Just a little background beyond what Amanda mentioned. I actually worked at Candid for 4 years before I was at Westlake Porter Public Library. So I specifically did this type of work of assisting people with finding grants and learning the basics of proposal writing. So I hope that you get something valuable from this presentation today. So let's get started. So again, just want to welcome you to Candid's basic introduction to grant seeking and proposal writing. So upon completion of this training, you should be able to understand the basic types of foundations and funder motivations for giving grants. Also, how to research potential funders and plan your initial approach to grant makers. And of course, how to list the basic elements of and draft a standard project proposal. So let's begin by talking about the 10 most important things you need to know about grant seeking while demystifying some of the biggest myths around that process. So first, you can't survive on grants alone. Many people think they just need to get a few big grants to support their organizations, but it's important to know that your nonprofit cannot survive on grants alone. Here's a quick question. What do you think is the biggest source of private contributions to nonprofits, foundations, or individuals? You want to throw answers in the chat? Or unmute yourself? Either one is good. Very good, everyone. The answer is definitely individuals. Well, let's see why that is. So if we take a look at the private sources of support for nonprofits in the United States, You can see that despite what most people may assume, foundations and corporations together account for only a small fraction of charitable giving. The vast majority of private giving comes from individuals, people like you and me, who give to their favorite local nonprofits, schools, or their houses of worship. So why is this the case? Well, there are more people in the world than foundations and corporations put together. Other good reasons to have individuals as part of your funding mix is that they tend to be more loyal over time. An individual may start with giving a very small gift to your organization, and with cultivating that relationship, those gifts could grow to include bequests through their wills, trusts, and estates. This is often called planned giving. Individuals are easier to approach since there's no formal process for asking individuals for money like there is for foundations. So it's a more personal appeal. Also, we're not just talking about wealthy people. A lot of wealthy people may in fact have foundations, and they would then be included under the foundation category there on your screen. So while foundation giving may be one component of your overall grant seeking strategy, you can't depend solely on foundations for your funding. You will need to develop multiple revenue streams from various sources. So, of course, not all foundations are alike. In the social sector, many foundation insiders often say, if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. That simply means that all foundations are different with varying sizes, interests, and motivations. So what do we mean by that? Let's start by saying the term foundation in an organization doesn't necessarily mean that that organization gives money away. Conversely, some private foundations with significant grant-making initiatives don't have the word foundation in their name at all, such as the Carnegie Corporation or the Duke Endowment. In addition, there are various types of grant makers. Private foundations are the type that most of you have heard of, and there are three major categories. Independent or private foundations are grant-making organizations whose funds are generally derived from an individual, a group of individuals, or a family, and often include the family names such as the Gates, Ford, and MacArthur foundations. But most are very small foundations, many of which are referred to as family foundations because of a high degree of family involvement. Many of these small family foundations don't even have staff, which is the reason some only accept applications by invitation only. The Brush Foundation, which focuses its funding on family planning and reproductive rights, is a good example of a local independent foundation here in Greater Cleveland. Company-sponsored foundations, also referred to as corporate foundations, are private foundations whose grant funds are derived from the contributions of a for-profit business. While a company-sponsored foundation may retain close ties with the donor company, it is an independent organization with its own endowment and board of directors, and is subject to the same rules and regulations as private foundations. Key Bank is an example of a company-sponsored foundation. Also, one type of private foundation which works a little differently is operating foundations. An operating foundation may award some grants, but the total is generally small relative to the funds used for the foundation's own programs. So private foundations are regulated by the IRS. They were required to give money away, a minimum of 5% of their prior year's assets, which can be averaged out over a few years. Because of that, they have to annually report to the IRS who they've given grants to and how much by submitting a 990 PF. And the PF stands for private foundation. In addition to private foundations, there are several other categories of grant makers. We've already seen that some corporations set up company-sponsored foundations. Others give directly through what are known as direct corporate giving programs, which are grant-making programs established and administered within a for-profit company. Unlike corporate foundations, they are not a separate entity from the corporation, and their annual grants totals are generally directly related to companies' current profits. The last category of grant makers are grant-making public charities. Grant-making public charities, also known as public foundations, are usually supported substantially by contributions from individuals, corporations, and foundations, just like other nonprofits. They receive funds from a variety of sources instead of a single source like private foundations. Some examples of private charities are community foundations. So community foundations are public charities that make grants for charitable purposes in a specific community or region. A well-known local example is the Cleveland Foundation, which is in fact the world's first community foundation. There are also population or issue-oriented foundations. The Global Fund for Women or the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research are examples of population or issue-oriented foundations. Also, just as corporations can establish private foundations, they may set up public charities as fundraising vehicles, like the Avon Foundation for Women. So now that we know a little bit more about the different types of foundations you will be researching and approaching, let's take a quick look at some of the factors that might motivate them to give. So private foundations primarily want to fulfill philanthropic goals and interests while supporting a variety of issues through an objective process. Remember that each foundation will have specific goals and interests, just like you do. So one of the main purposes of doing thorough research before you approach a potential funder is to help you better identify how you can align your goals and interests with theirs. With corporate funders, remember that they tend to have more than just a pure philanthropic interest. They often give money to nonprofits to advance their business objectives, increase their visibility, and enhance their image by giving back to the community where their employees and consumers live and work. Grant-making public charities, on the other hand, like community foundations, are very visible in the communities they serve and want to assist a wide variety of issues and population groups within those communities. So grant seeking is a very competitive process. When approaching funders for support, you have to prove to them that you are a credible nonprofit organization with the capacity to carry out a well-planned idea, purpose, and project. You must also show that it isn't just about the need of your organization, but the people you are serving and the impact it will make. How is what you're asking for going to change lives? For example, if you're asking for money to renovate a building or hire new staff, what difference will that make in your community and the people you serve? How will it better help you to achieve or advance your mission? Sorry, I have a pop-up there. Give me 1 second. Can everyone still hear me?
Yep, we can hear you and see your slides. You're doing great.
All right, thank you. So how do you demonstrate credibility for your organization when you're approaching a funder? So you want to prove that you're a legal nonprofit. In the state of Ohio, what that means is, first and foremost, you want to acquire your 501c3 status through the IRS, and you'll also want to register with the Ohio Secretary of State's office. Do you have a compelling mission that's compatible with the funder's focus area? You want to make sure that the funder you're approaching is a good match for the work that you're doing. Do you have strong leadership in terms of your staff and your board members? Do you provide high quality programs that meet a real need in the community? And do you have a strong organizational and financial infrastructure? Make sure before you approach any funder that you do your homework. You never want to approach a grant maker unprepared. When seeking a grant, you must know as much as you possibly can about that particular foundation before you approach them. And of course, remember, to be effective at finding grants, you must create an individual strategy for each potential funder and tailor your proposal around who you are approaching and why. The one-size-fits-all approach does not work here. So to get the grant, you have to find the right match. You are looking to establish a match between the mission and activities of your nonprofit organization and the philanthropic mission and funding interests of the foundation you are approaching. The ultimate goal of this match is to create a partnership between your organization and the funder that can help to solve problems and address issues that you both care about. So make sure you look at who funds in my area of interest and the population that you serve, who's funding in your geographic region, and who will support the specific need of your organization. So while you're doing your research, you also need to find out, has the grantmaker funded organizations like yours in the past? And how much money should you ask for? You'll get a better idea of a funder's potential interest if you can determine that it is given to organizations or programs similar to yours in the past. Comparing several years of grants lists, if available, will help you determine if a giving pattern exists that matches your funding requirements. It will also give you a good indication of how much to ask for. Another thing you want to do through your research is to see if you can find a connection. You don't need to know someone, obviously, to get a grant, but it does help you get your foot in the door. So where can you find connections? You can look to your board members or donors. Look at the relationships that they have with people who work at grant-making organizations that you're seeking funds from. Organizational partners. Look at those organizations that you're already collaborating with to see who they know and put you into touch with. Your current funders. Make sure you build strong relationships with funders that you're already currently working with. While they may not fund you every single year, those are people that sometimes will really love the work that you're doing and want to support your mission, and you may be able to go back to in the future. And also check LinkedIn. Look at who's connected to who in terms of, your colleagues, people you've met at conferences and so forth. Those can be really useful when you're looking to make those connections with funders. So I'm just going to stop sharing the presentation for a moment and show you the Foundation Directory online database. So this is a resource that Candid offers to individuals and nonprofits. It is subscription-based service, and you can definitely subscribe, and many larger organizations do, but that's sometimes cost prohibitive for smaller organizations. And there are partner locations like the library I work at, Westlake Porter Public Library, where people can come in and actually access that database for free. So you see with FDO, they have a pretty straightforward search box that you're welcome to use. So if there's something specific that you're looking for, so education services in Cleveland, Ohio, or reproductive rights in Cuyahoga County, you can sort of do that type of search. If it start a general search like that. You can also use the advanced search filters that they have here. And these are really good because then you could look specifically at the subject area, the geographic focus, the population you're serving. I would give you a quick tip that you'll notice here, geographic focus and location. So location is simply where the grant makers' offices are located. When you're looking for funding, you'll want to keep your eye on the geographic focus. So that shows you where they're sending that money to. You can also look up specific organizations here as well. So if there's a specific funder you're looking to research, you can put their name in here and potentially find them in the database. If there's another organization in the area that's doing work that's similar to yours, you can also look at those recipient organizations and kind of do a comparison and then see who's been funding their work, because those funders may be a good fit for what you're trying to accomplish. So do a quick little search here. So we'll go down to education and look at adult education. And then here, I'm just going to put in Cuyahoga County. And let's see what we get in the search results. So the initial search results, we have 144 grant makers. And here you'll get like a little preview of that list. If you hover over a specific funder, you'll actually get like a quick snapshot that gives you information about their giving and their top funding areas. You'll also notice that you can look at previously awarded grants. So this is really good for calling that information to see who they've already funded in the past, how much they've given, and for what purposes. You can also, again, look at the recipient organizations to see who's doing similar work to yours and who's funding them. And if you want to do a deeper dive, especially if you're doing intensive prospect research, you can also look through their 990 forms here. But let's go to Cleveland Foundation. And now you can see the full profile for the organization. And you'll see a little data visualization at the top that gives you some information about their funding. And then here you'll be able to see some of the grants that they've awarded previously. You'll also be able to get a general view of their funding interest to see, the subjects, their specific support categories, and so forth. Related organizations is really nice because you'll be able to see some of the smaller organizations that a large funder like Cleveland Foundation also helps operate. As you're conducting your research on funders, looking at the About section can be incredibly useful because it gives you some history and background on that organization and their program areas. You can also see other funders to consider. So organizations that have similar giving patterns as that funder that you're looking at. Now, not every funder will have this information, but many do have their application or request for proposal information publicly available. And when they do, that is added to the database for easy access as well. So you'll see it gives you a little bit of information about deadlines and approaches. And this right here, giving limitations, this is probably one of the most important aspects of the funder profile. Sometimes I actually tell people, especially if they're doing a lot of research in a short amount of time, look at the giving limitations first. That way you can see what they will and will not fund. And that way, if they say, oh, we don't fund, building renovations, if we don't fund for religious purposes, you'll immediately know that. And then you can just move on to looking at other grant makers. Again, you can see the financial information from the 1990s. The who's who section is really helpful because then this is where we can help build relationships, make those connections, because you'll be able to see staff members, board members, and other people who are related to the organization and their work. The communication section gives you a little bit of press information about that organization. And then you'll see their contact information. And the really good part about all of this is that when you're doing this research, over here you have an option to download the PDF. So you can have an actual PDF of this grantmaker profile. You can also directly send it via email to yourself. Again, that's also very useful when you're conducting research in a limited amount of time, because then you can save that information and come back to it later. Does anybody have any questions about FDO?
Natalie, do you know where we can find what libraries like yours have the FGO for free online?
Yes.
I was looking around in there. I figured you were familiar.
So yes, if you go to Candid's website, which is learning.candid.org, it has a wealth of information about nonprofit management and fundraising. But specifically, when you're trying to find a location, there's the Find Us section. And if you go there, you can actually put in either like your zip code, your county, or your city and state, and then it will show you the funding information network locations in your area.
Fantastic.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, we'll pop back over to the presentation. So funders usually want a letter of intent or letter of inquiry as the initial approach, which is usually just a 2-page mini version of your proposal. In making your initial approach, the key is to have your full proposal written before you pick up the phone or submit anything in writing. And the goal of the initial approach is to gauge a funder's interest in what you will be asking for and to see if they would like for you to submit a full proposal. So with that in mind, you want to have the bulk of your proposal already written. So when you get the green light, you can easily tailor it to meet the funder's specific requirements and send it out as soon as possible. You may also want to try to make a telephone call unless a funder says no phone calls, please. Definitely respect that if they don't take phone calls. But when given a chance for the initial approach by the potential funder, try to use a very personal one. It's better for building the relationship. By all means, definitely try not to initiate the relationship by email, as that can be very impersonal, especially when you're trying to introduce yourself to a funder for the first time. When making a phone call or having a face-to-face meeting with a funder, you want to have the full proposal already written with an executive summary and some brief talking points. That can be really helpful in guiding your conversation and answering their questions. And then if they are interested, they'll probably have additional questions about your project. You just want to be prepared for that. Make sure you know who you're talking to and why. Never pick up the phone, have a meeting with someone or send a proposal or letter of intent without doing your homework first. Know who you're approaching and why you're reaching out to them. And keep the conversation brief and to the point. Always respect the funder's time and be well prepared. Many times you won't be speaking, obviously, with an executive director of an organization or the president, but you may speak to an assistant there, and that person is obviously very knowledgeable about the organization and can usually really sort of answer your questions, and they'll know if you're a good fit for that organization and then pass your information along. So let's take a quick look at the proposal writing process itself. So planning is an important first step in the proposal writing process. Grant seeking is very competitive, and you need to be very prepared when approaching funders. In getting started, you need to make sure you give yourself enough time to go through each step of this process so that you can end up with a competitive proposal. Once you submit the proposal to the foundation, they will have their own process for reviewing the many requests they receive. So I'd just like to ask, on average, how long do you think the process could realistically take from start to finish when you apply for a grant until you actually receive that check? All right, I'm saying up to a year, 6 months. Tomorrow. Oh, if only, Amanda. But yes, you're all in the right ballpark. On average, it takes about 6 to 9 months from beginning to end of that process. And again, that's always going to vary depending on the organization. Smaller organizations whose board only meets to make these types of approvals a couple of times a year, it's going to take longer. Let's see. So next, you'll need to decide what kind of support you need. Funding for general operations, funding for a specific project or program, or something else such as equipment or a building renovation. It is often easier to secure funding for a specific project or program than for general operations. Many times, funders want to be able to put their money into something where they feel like they see results. And obviously, something that has measurable tracking mechanisms, such as programs and projects, is a little more attractive to them than paying the salaries of staff members or helping get new equipment that is actually a necessity to the organization. But again, you can't really evaluate how successfully that is used. So just know that when you reach out to organizations. And so just make sure that you're going to focus on preparing a project proposal through the process. The process is often similar for a proposal for general operating support. For general operating support, instead of focusing on a specific program or project, you will apply these elements to your organization as a whole. So who will you approach? Before you start writing, you need to know as much about the funder as possible. Thorough research helps you to know who you're approaching and why. When we ask funders what the #1 reason is why a proposal isn't funded, they often say it's because it wasn't the right fit for what they were looking for. That's why finding the right match between what you plan to do and the funder's interests is critical to the success of your proposals. Many proposals focus on what's in it for them, the organization. Few pay enough attention, if any, to what's in it for the funder. A grant proposal should be viewed as a win-win proposition. Last but not least, remember the why. The why is as important as the who. When you identify a list of potential prospects, you need to tell them why they should care about your particular project or program based on their specific interests. How will it help them to achieve their goals as well as yours? So as you're putting this all together, again, remember, you're going to plan and you need to know what the money is going to be for. Conduct your research so you know which funders to approach. In terms of writing, how do you put this information together? And then follow up, what to do once the decision has been made. Oh, and a quick tip, always, always, always follow the funder's guidelines. That's really important. And it lets them know that you're paying attention. So the typical proposal elements, these are the basic elements of a standard proposal. So you have the executive summary, the narrative, which is the largest section of your proposal. That just describes the statement of need, your proposed project, your organizational history and background, and the conclusion. You will also need to include a budget along with other supporting materials the funder requires for the application. So in order to write an effective proposal, you must be able to make a compelling case for support. A grant is an investment, and with any investment, the funder is looking for a high rate of return with a low risk. With that in mind, here's some questions that most, if not all, funders will want to know the answers to. What specific need are you addressing? What are you trying to achieve? What is your strategy for making this happen? How will you know if you are successful? Why are you the best organization to do this work? And how will this project sustain itself in the long run? So we're going to take a look at these questions individually. So what specific need are you addressing? This tells the reader what problem you are trying to solve and why they should care. It's not enough to state the problem. You will also need to back it up with supporting facts and statistics. Make sure your facts and statistics are relevant to the specific population and community you are serving and fits the size and scope of your solution. No matter how serious the problem is, don't paint such a grim picture that the situation appears hopeless, no matter how much money a funder might give you. Quick tip, be prepared to explain how your solution is addressing the size and scale of the need that you are addressing. What are you trying to achieve? The project description will be the longest and most detailed section of your proposal. This is the section in which you will describe exactly how you plan to address the issue you raised in the needs section with measurable outcomes. This section will usually begin with a statement of project goals and objectives. People and even funders use these terms differently, but for our purposes today, we'll say that goals are broad, general statements of what you plan to accomplish. Objectives flow from the goals, and they are specific and measurable within a realistic time frame. Some people use the SMART acronym to describe objectives, which means your objectives should be specific, measurable, achievable, and realistic within a defined time frame. You should also discuss whether this issue is currently being addressed. If so, how will your solution be different? So your project description should also detail the particular methods you will use to implement your project. In other words, what are your specific strategies for accomplishing your goals and objectives? This section details your plan of action, which should clearly explain the who, what, when, where, and how of your strategy. How will your plan be implemented, including who will do the work, what is going to happen, where will it happen, and when will it happen? In addition to a well thought out description, you should also include a timetable or step-by-step plan showing exactly how the plan will be executed and completed. Be sure to also emphasize any collaborations or partnerships you may have with other organizations or community groups. Foundations like to see organizations working together in collective and innovative ways rather than duplicating their efforts. Along those same lines, if you believe that your project is replicable and can be a model for others, include that information as well. It will help demonstrate that funding your organization or project will have a more long-lasting and far-reaching impact. So how will you evaluate your project is also a very important question that funders will ask. Your evaluation process will show them, but also you if you have achieved your goals and objectives. It will also help you measure your success and overall impact and prove that what you are doing is making a difference. There are many kinds of evaluation techniques, which will depend on many different factors, but here are some things to keep in mind. You'll want to specify your program objectives in measurable terms. You'll also want to identify key indicators of success. You'll also want to outline data collection and analysis activities and develop a timeline to monitor the success of the program. At some point in your proposal, you will need to give the reader information about your organization as a whole. You can do that at the beginning or end of your proposal. This is where you talk about your mission and organizational history, along with your other programs and services, your accomplishments, your reputation, your visibility in the community, and your track record of success. Bear in mind that most foundations will be looking for a track record of significant accomplishment. If your organization is new and you don't yet have much of a track record, you may have some difficulty in securing foundation support. If that's the case, you might want to shift your fundraising strategy and spend your first year or two gathering support from individuals in your community who are in a position to know your personal reputation and see the good work you are doing. So how will the project sustain itself in the long run? Foundations tend to think in the long term. Before funding your project, they may be concerned about how you will sustain it after the grant period ends. No foundation is going to fund you forever. And your nonprofit cannot exist on grant support alone. So you need to think through how your organization will support itself in the long run. What is your business plan? How will you support your work if grant funding is not readily available? Overall, you should be sure to look for diverse streams of funding like we discussed at earlier part of the presentation. Now, let's return to the proposal itself. The last part is the conclusion. You should end with a compelling conclusion which speaks to why this funder should fund this project. It doesn't have to be long. A paragraph or two will usually do. Your goal here is to answer what I call the so what question. If this project is funded, how will life be better and for whom, and why should this funder care? How will this be a mutually beneficial partnership? So let's look at the executive summary. How do you reduce everything down to one page? The summary is one of the most important parts of the proposal because the reader will often read it first to determine if they want to read the rest of the proposal. If it doesn't catch a reader's attention right away, they may not continue reading it. It also helps to have an executive summary on hand when making the initial approach, so it's good to have a one-page summary whether the funder asks for one or not. Most people who write proposals find that it's easier to write the full proposal first and then extract the key information to put into the one-page summary. Your executive summary will include, will include your statement of need, the name of the project you are requesting money for, a brief description of your project, including the goals and objectives, information about your organization as a whole, and how much money you are asking for. Along with your proposal, you'll need to send a number of documents, a copy of your IRS letter of determination to prove that you are a legal nonprofit. The funder will also want you to send other financial documentation along with your proposal budget, such as your organization's most recent audited financial statements, your 990, and perhaps your general operating budget for the past few years. Things like audits can be expensive, so if you don't have something a funder requests, don't just leave that out. Call and ask if they will accept something else in place of that. The funder will also usually request a list of your board of directors or trustees. Be sure to provide names along with professional affiliations. It's also a good idea to supply brief biographical information of your key staff members to point out, once again, the people carrying out your project have sufficient knowledge and experience to ensure its success. The main thing here is to include everything the funder asks for and very little of anything else. They typically do not want additional materials such as books, videos, news clippings. If you have these, you can just refer to them in your proposal and say you will make them available upon request. When filling out online applications, it is generally okay to add links to additional information where possible. Overall, you want to make sure that your proposal is legible and easy to read with no typos. Make sure you don't use any fancy fonts or binders. Keep it simple and clean. And remember to always follow each funder's guidelines to the T. The first indicator of your credibility is whether or not you can follow directions. So how do you follow up with a funder once you've applied for a grant? Once you've submitted your proposal and done all you can do, you just have to kind of sit back and let them make the decision. This is probably the hardest part of the process, and the answer will either be yes or no. In either case, that's where the real work begins. So let's say the answer is yes. Yay! So you've done everything right and had a little luck as well. So you received the notification that your project has been approved for funding. You'll often receive a grant agreement letter from the funder before you receive the actual check. You'll need to review, sign, and send it back to the funder before they send the check. This is a good time to include a nice thank you letter. The thank you letter gives you an opportunity to not only express appreciation for the grant, but to tell the funder it's going to make a difference to the people you serve. Remember that receiving a grant isn't the end of the process. In fact, it's the beginning of the relationship. Your funder is your partner now, and during the course of the grant period, you will want to keep your program officer informed about how the project is going. That means sending all required reports and sending them on time. In addition, if your project has made a significant accomplishment or if you've achieved some kind of milestone, by all means, send a note or make a phone call to let them know. Also, if you are having a reception or event, don't forget to add your program officer to the invitation list. They might not be able to come, but it's a good practice to invite others. And this type of communication is a really good way to build relationship with funders, as well as paving a way for the renewal of a request in the future. But the odds are 1 out of 3, they'll say yes. The other 2 will probably say no, or, not right now. So you'll want to find out why, if you can do it graciously. Some funders will not have a specific reason for why you didn't get the grant. It's usually because there's just not enough funding to go around, so it's perfectly acceptable to ask whether you can try again in the future. If the answer is positive, keep the foundation staff informed of your good work and the progress you're making. This shows the funder that you are committed to your work and mission and are determined to do the work with or without their grant, but keep your communication strategic and effective. Don't just put them on your mailing list. However, it's also possible that they will tell you for one reason or another, perhaps they're going to change their giving priorities. Applying again wouldn't be worth your time. And that's good to know. So that way you can focus on finding other funders. Either way, it will be time to devise a new strategy and move on. So key takeaways for what we've discussed today: make sure that you find the right fit in a funder. Obviously, a resource like the Foundation Directory Online Database can be really useful for that purpose. And again, we have lots of partner locations where you can access that. You can also contact me if you have any questions. I'm sure Amanda can pass my information along. Feel free to email me and I will try to help you if you want to come in to do a short tutorial on the database, or you just have general questions regarding fundraising or nonprofit management. Again, feel free to contact me. Also, make sure you focus on the funder's motivations and interests. This isn't necessarily just about what it will do for your organization. It's about what's in it for them. It's a win-win situation there. Make sure you're prepared, do your research and know who you're approaching and why. And when crafting your proposal, make sure you keep your language clear and concise, that you focus on the funder's areas of interest, that you follow their guidelines to a T, and make sure to revise and edit before submitting. Always make sure you get a second pair of eyes on a proposal. I think it's always useful to get feedback before you send that off. Any questions?
I have a question, but Alyssa asked a question in the chat, so maybe you should answer that one first.
Oh yeah, sorry.
You don't have to say sorry. I thought I was unmuted, so I'll read it for you, Natalie. The question is, like, when we haven't heard back after the announcement date about whether the grant is awarded, and Alyssa, jump in if I'm not getting it, when is it okay to reach out to our program officer? And I know that can really matter on a relationship you might have or if you've applied before. And Alyssa, did I get the gist of your question?
Yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, again, like you said, I think it's about the relationship that you have with someone at that particular funding organization. So there are some where I feel like you may want to wait a wee bit before you reach out, especially if you don't have that relationship, just to give yourself some time to really reflect on that. But definitely, if you have a good relationship with the program officer or someone else at that grant making organization, definitely give them a call and just say, you know, what was it that you were looking for that wasn't part of our sort of objectives and goals here? I think many of them are actually really open to having those conversations, to be honest, because they want you to be successful. It's like they want your programs to actually meet the needs of the communities you're trying to serve. So definitely, again, I think it's going to vary depending on the organization, but I think most are open to that. And I think you could do that pretty soon after you receive that information from them.
Yeah, so who was our next person with the question? You can go ahead and ask it. It's lovely to hear voices on the webinar too.
Okay. Hi, my name's Jordan, Natalie. So my question, and it might kind of tie back into the relationship aspect that you were talking about, is like, so if you've already received a grant from a foundation, how do you, or is there a different process to apply for it again?
Mm-hmm. That will depend on the funder. Like, I know some have a specific process for renewal requests. So that may look different than the general application for organizations. But generally, if they're interested, you're probably going to receive some sort of information if there's something specific for renewal requests. Otherwise, you're just going to follow the basic guidelines when you apply again.
Okay. And if it's kind of like the same like project, I guess is the word that you're using. Like I think of it more as like an event that you like have maybe like annually or something that you need a grant for. So like if you got a grant from this one organization for 2021 and you need it again for 2022, how do you like, are there certain parts of the outline that you were talking about that you may not include, since it's kind of like a repeating project, or it's an ongoing project, it's not like a new project, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I think it's fine to keep that information intact. What you'll want to include are any measures to track the success of that event, who benefited from that event, any feedback that you receive from participants through like surveys or other means of evaluation, because having that information will be useful, because then they know, oh, this was actually successful. This is what people were getting out of it. And then you're able to demonstrate that, in fact, the grant you were previously awarded was worthwhile. It's like, and then they're more inclined to fund that again in the future.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jordan. Any other questions?
I don't see anything else in the chat. So you all can use your jazz hands and your reactions to say, thank you, Natalie, for teaching us all the things that we didn't know and taking our questions. I also hope that folks know, like, we're in it together. A lot of us are writing grants and proposals, and we're doing this research, whether we're volunteering for an organization or it's a part of our role in an organization. So I hope that you know that you can always reach out to Plexus, and we'll help you connect with other people that were on the call and other resources. And just before you go, I just have a quick poll that I would love for you to take as we start to launch these Power Of series again. Just if there's topical areas that you're interested in. This is really about kind of a skill building. Our Plexus Connect series that we do on the fourth Tuesday, those are a little bit more topical. You can also drop in here if there's not something I put on the poll into the chat, and I'll grab it from there. We just so appreciate you. And let me see if there's anything else. We will make the recording available for sure. Natalie, if you had slides or other resources you want me to put together for folks, I'll put that in the Facebook event and follow up as an email. And I just love that you spent this Tuesday with us. And this is one of the things that we do best, which is creating a meeting place and a resource sharing place. It's a huge part of our mission here at Plexus. So thanks for being a part of that with us today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Amanda. And thank you everyone for coming.
Indeed.